100 backpacks that are clear. So as part of this Be Prepared presentation, please take one. If you want to take one for each family member, you're welcome to do that. We have plenty of them. And along with them are dry erase markers, so you can actually write on your backpack if you want to. So plenty of them, don't be afraid. And I would like to introduce my friend Kevin Esmeo from the Longmont Office of Emergency Management. Did I say your name?
Yep.
There you go. So without further ado, Kevin.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you all for having me here today. Can everyone hear me okay? Sounds like the mic system's working. We're all good with that. I understand we're recording today, too, so I'll have to be on my best behavior since this is all being recorded. But this is one of my favorite things to come out and do for my job. Just a quick introduction. I work with the Office of Emergency Management here in Longmont. So what that is that's different from the 911 Emergency Communications Center. That's where you call for your immediate if you need one resource, fire truck, police, EMS, things like that. What we do is we kind of go into the next level of those things where it's going to be a longer term incident. So we're talking fires, floods, tornadoes, anything like that that would be a little bit more complicated, involve more resources for longer amount of times, and some resources that are typically not associated with your regular kind of day-to-day emergency responses. So what me and a couple other staff do for the city of Longmont is just kind of work on a lot of those plans, organizational styles, exercises, training, and equipment that the city would need to be able to identify any gaps in our preparedness. And as part of that, one of the biggest pieces is the about 100,000 plus people that live and work here in the city of Longmont day to day. It's a really big thing that we've a shift that we've been doing for years, trying to do these preparedness talks, but really trying to make sure we change that paradigm of us planning for disasters to us planning with the community for disasters. So I've got a couple handouts for everyone, and for anyone online or watching this later, we can have these available for pickup later. But everyone should have a sheet with a bunch of little X's on it, a sheet with some a couple stapled pages together with some boxes to write in. You should get a little spiral-bound notebook with a whole bunch of information on emergencies, a red bookmark that'll tell you how to sign up for emergency notifications on your cell phone, and I think that's all we've handed out at this point. But and a pencil to write with. I forgot that I gave you all homework and some group assignments to do without giving you anything to write with. So, but luckily we kind of worked through that. We figured out a solution, and that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, to how to deal with some things that are unexpected. So if you could go ahead, I have my slide deck. I don't have a clicker. I have somebody that's going to be doing it for me. So we're going to try and move through these slides kind of quickly because a lot of this information at this point is about disasters are bad. And I think we all understand that at this point. Disasters are bad and they can happen to us. So different types of disasters. You can go ahead and click through. All right. So just kind of think about some of the things that we deal with here in the community. We'll kind of just do some shout outs, some things that you've seen here, some things that you think could happen here, some things that you're particularly worried about. So, ice, that's a good one. Flooding, I heard. What other ones? Fire. Car crash? Power outage. All right. Train crashes. Hail. Tornadoes. Robbery? Yeah. Yeah. So go ahead and click through. Think, all right, we hit flooding. Keep clicking through. Wildfires. All right. Severe storm, tornadoes. I don't think we said that one. Other types. That about catches everything else. Keep clicking through. All right. So a lot of the stuff that we talked about, we went through. So we're all pretty knowledgeable on the things that could happen around here. Go ahead, next slide. Recent local ones. This slide's a little bit more dated, but we all are a little more familiar with some of the other things that have happened recently. But some people are new to this community. Some people have lived here their whole lives. But just some examples of the kind of things that we see out here. Just, tornadoes aren't as common here, but when they do happen, it can be a really big impact. We've had two in the area recently. We have had tornadoes here in Longmont before as well. And one of the biggest ones that comes to mind, especially for the long-term residents around here, were the floods. If anyone remembers, how many days kind of were you impacted? Anyone that was living here during the floods? And in what kind of ways? Roads are closed. Anyone power outages, had to evacuate, had to leave their homes? All right, that's pretty lucky, but just based on where you are, again, with floods, it's a little bit more easy to know if you're in the floodplain or if you're not. With tornadoes, they can kind of touch down anywhere, so there's really not a lot of ways to say, is my house in the tornado zone or not? Fires, that we've all learned a lot about, knowing where there's fuels, where there's things that can burn, if you're close to an open space, if you're close to that urban wildland interface, or the WUI as we call it. But just some different things to kind of look out for and be aware to start your preparedness and get your brain going. Next slide. So why be ready? We see right there the kind of the empty store shelves on the first day of flooding in 2013. We all got to see that a lot at the beginning of COVID. What went off the shelves right away? Toilet paper. And we all, just something that we've kind of taken for granted, something that was really hard to predict would be the thing that would run out on the shelves, was all gone. And what were some kind of strategies that you used to get around that? Either you could have it beforehand, like we talk about when you're building a kit. That was one of the items that was on there, and I got so lucky that I had an extra little pack of it that I didn't have to go deal with the madness. But some other ways, I mean, talking to your friends and neighbors, maybe sharing resources, maybe adjusting some of those resources. Like, okay, I can't get toilet paper. What else? What else could I use? Being a little bit more creative. But as we've seen, kind of those ripple effects after COVID that are still kind of going through. Things are getting less available, more expensive, and just some ways that we have to kind of figure out that adapt, improvise, overcome. To be able to deal with those disruptions. Some other things is just we want to help as much as we can. We have a lot of great people here in the city of Longmont. Just a lot of services that we provide for day-to-day life here in the city. But sometimes those can get disrupted. Sometimes with COVID, the things that we were worrying about were if people were going to get sick and weren't going to be able to do their day-to-day jobs, how could we work around that? How could we make sure that we were prioritizing the things that were needed for just basic life here in the city? How could we make sure we keep the power on, the water running, the gas running, any other types of infrastructure to make sure we limit those disruptions? Next slide. So how to be ready. There's kind of a big spectrum as far as what people consider to be ready, but we're all different, and that's kind of where that comes from. We all have different interests. We all have different ideas of what it means to be prepared. Down from some of the little things that I can get through my day-to-day life. I can put gas in the car. I can get to work. I can put food on the table. To the full-on, if anyone's ever had a chance to watch the Doomsday Preppers, some of them are very... They're ready for anything, but what disruptions does that cause to their everyday life? What social disruptions? What just different kind of things are they not doing because of what they've decided to prioritize in their emergency preparedness? I've caught a couple episodes. I definitely haven't seen them all, but one of the ones I saw, the person had 2 of everything. Had made sure they had 2 vehicles, 2 shelters, 2... even down to he married a twin so that he would have a backup wife. I think that's a little extreme, but it's just kind of talking about like what's every person's a little bit different on what they decide are the priorities that they want to make sure that they can maintain. Next slide. So some of the big things that we really want to put out in this presentation are how to get those warnings, when something bad is coming, when you should start preparing, and just to make sure that everyone knows, if you're new to this area, if you're old to this area, what you can expect. So some of the things we really first like to push out is everyone has that little red bookmark. That system is called Everbridge. What it's also generically known as is reverse 911. So the same way that you can call the city and have responders en route, we want to make sure that that same dispatch center is able to talk to everyone in the community and be able to let them know about an emergency. This system is really good. It's been around for years, but it does have some limitations. The biggest one right now is that it was built for when everybody had a landline in their home. So it was very good at running through those copper lines, understanding that infrastructure, getting plugged in with that. However, we don't use landlines anymore. We haven't used them they've been phasing out over the last couple decades. So this one, you are automatically signed up if you have a landline. However, if you don't, if you some voice over IP, if you have Comcast, they automatically sign you up. But if you're primarily on a mobile phone, cell phone, you have to sign yourself up. This is an opt-in system where you will be able to put in your who you are, where your location is, and how you'd like to be contacted. Another thing about this is it is for one person. It's not for a household, because what you can do with this system is you can say primarily if there was a hazard in the area where I put my address of my workplace or my home, where I would be, they would notify you by sending you a text. If the text didn't work, they would go to a phone call. If the phone call didn't work, it could go to an email or a second phone. So if you sign up 2 people on that system, it'll stop once you acknowledge the call. So if you answer the text, if they say, did you get this, yes or no, and you put yes, it won't do the call, it won't do the email, it won't keep going forward. So it's for each individual. That's something we really want to point out. But it is a really good system. Basically, all our dispatchers have to do is pull up a map, draw a polygon of where the disaster could impact. This could be little things like if there was a security police, if they had somebody in a house, if they had a kind of a situation that they want people to avoid, they can do it for a couple blocks. Or during the Marshall fires, we did it for a very large area for people in Louisville and Superior to evacuate. And then on top of that, we also are working on rolling out a newer system. It's been in the news a lot lately, is those wireless emergency alerts, or WEA, and another system called the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System, IPAWS. So basically, those are kind of filling that gap that I was talking about with the old system that was primarily built for the old landline infrastructure, and it's closing that gap to where you don't have to opt in. Those are those Amber Alert style messages that you get. But those in your phone can be turned on and off, and so you have to make sure that they're set to be on. Those are those national significance incidents. Everyone probably got one at the beginning of COVID. Those ones you really just have to make sure that you're plugged in the right ways. We're working on making it an automatic system, but it's something that even if it was automatic, it's good to be aware of it and understand how it works. Another thing that we really recommend is getting a Noaa All Hazards radio. I see you have a question. I'll get to it in a second. Have a Noaa All Hazards radio. So there's a few different types of those. There's weather band radios, which pretty much you just turn them on, you switch to the right frequency, just like an AM/FM radio, and you're able to just listen to the weather. The limitations of those is they have to be on, and you have to be listening to them to get the information. So there's a couple other types. There's also a Noaa All Hazards Alert radio, which are the ones that have a special dial on them. Not only will they turn on when you turn them on, but they can be set so when the weather service sends out an alert, sends out a warning, they will automatically turn on, make a nice loud tone to let you know that something is going on, and they'll read you the alert information. We used those ones during the Calwood fires back in 2020. And unfortunately, it goes out a very wide area. There were people in Longmont that got the alerts. There were people down in the Denver metro that got some of the alerts. And we actually had it pick up on Amazon Alexa systems that it picked up some of the message, but not all of the message. It picked up there's a fire warning in your area, there's fire danger in your area. So kind of caused some other problems. We had to answer a lot more questions. Just that none of these are perfect. And then one of the other systems that we have are the same code radios. So what these are is you can program them to your exact county to be able to pick up those messages. And the other really nice thing about these is they don't just set the tones, read the message, and then stop. These ones, there'll be a little red flashing light on them if you miss the message, if you're away that you can replay those messages. So these ones are the best for the homes. I recommend the tone alert, the ones I talked about before for travel. because they can work anywhere. You just have to figure out what the frequency of the weather band is, and it's usually 1 through 7, so they're very easy to program. These ones are a little bit more difficult to program, but once you get them set, put them in a good part of your house, like your kitchen central location. It's like having your own personal siren. All right, so I had a question in the back.
Another comment, I think that for Evacuation you can have multiple addresses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Home or school or your workplace.
Yes.
So different numbers at all those locations that you showed up.
Mm-hmm. So the comment that we had is for Everbridge. I did mention it's for one individual, but you can put multiple addresses in there. So that way, if the polygon has your home in it, if it has your work in it, if it has a relative that you would like to make sure that you get a notification if there's something going on in their area, it will notify you. It's just the limitation is that once somebody gets the notification, it stops. Another question? Mm-hmm. Okay. So that is also a county-wide system. Those cards we've printed out for Longmont, but if you live up in Lyons, and I'm sorry, the question was that the cards themselves say if you live in Longmont. Those are our Longmont specific ones, but it is a county-wide system of all the, So that would work, and if that doesn't work, some of that information on their card, if you look it up, you can be able to find if you live in Weld County, Larimer County, they all have a similar system. They might be called something different, but they all work the same way. But good question. Yeah, some of the information on our presentation is very Longmont specific. All right, any other questions about the radios? One other thing I would like to mention for everyone's situational awareness is that the city of Longmont does not have tornado sirens. They had them up until about 2017, I believe. It was a little bit before my time here, but just because of the decisions that were made, again, like those prioritizations I was talking about, cost-benefit risk analysis, they decided that the system that they had, the maintenance costs were not worth how often it was being used. And so they decided to dismantle the system. There was a bit of a catastrophic failure of it. If anyone was living here at the time, about 2, 3 a.m. they started going off, and they actually had to send the fire department out with bolt cutters to cut the power to each siren to be able to turn them off. So it's like I said, it was on that risk-benefit analysis to where I used to live, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. We had a lot of sirens because we had severe weather almost every week, it seemed like. We would have tornadoes, severe thunderstorms, high winds. We used that system a lot, but also where we lived, there was also a nuclear power plant that was federally regulated to have sirens covering the entire 10 miles around the plant. And that's the only reason we had so many of them. There were a lot of communities out there with the exact same risks that might have only had 1 or 2. Just, it all changes where you live. So the important thing I really want to point out is be aware of that. If you move away, figure out if there aren't sirens, what's going to be my backup? How am I going to improvise, adapt, and overcome with that? And a lot of that is, we like to say, get those radios. The city offers them for free. I've brought 25 with me today, so if anyone doesn't already have one of them, I can get you set up with one of them free of charge. And if anyone, the city actually offers, and a part of that trade-off of getting rid of the sirens, we offer free radios to anyone that wants one, essentially. One per household. All right. Other ways, we also have a AM radio station that's operated by the city. Typically, it just kind of gives out some tourist travel information, but it also, in a time of emergency, we can use that to broadcast. That is AM 1670. So just a way that if we really needed to get a message out to everyone, a one-to-many type message, we can also use that. Social media, also when those things are working, when you can still get those messages. We also have a City of Longmont page on Facebook, a City of Longmont Public Safety page on Facebook, and also the City of Longmont on Twitter, and I think Nextdoor also. We're on all of those platforms to make sure that when there is severe weather, we can put out some information on what to do about those. Another thing that was talking about the Marshall Fire, when some of those systems don't work, those are all really good to have in place, but we all have to make sure we're staying aware, using our 5 senses, using what we see around us, using what we're talking to our neighbors, talking to our friends, talking to our families, to be able to figure out if we feel safe in our environment. So they sent out the Everbridge message with the Marshall fires. They did not sound sirens. A big part of that is because typically what people do when there are sirens is they'll either do the right thing and try and make sure that, hey, something's going on. I need to figure out what it was or what it is. I need to get more information. But another thing that people do when sirens go off is get to the basement. That would not be a situation where that would be appropriate. So sometimes the messaging, it's a really quick decision that has to be made to send out the right message on the right platform. But something else that was happening a lot is what's called route alerting. That's where pretty much police and fire are going door to door, sounding the sirens, using the PA systems on their vehicles to be able to let people know, get out now. Just because of the speed of that event, within hours, it had burned miles. So it's the kind of thing that you always have to be aware of your situation and think, what would I do if something happened? I had some friends that didn't exactly live, they were right outside the disaster area or the evacuation orders. However, their apartment was filling up with smoke. They moved from California, so they're used to wildfires. The second that they decided, I don't feel safe here, they gathered up some belongings, they gathered their pets, and they went to go stay with a friend. They weren't ordered to evacuate, but based on the situation, they made that decision for themselves, and it was a very appropriate one to make. Any other questions about how we would inform you?
So I was just curious, did you know the part that burned in Marshall?
Mm-hmm.
That brand? How wild was it? Like how much sort of wildfire material was there on the ground?
Specifically, there were a lot of different fuel types in the area. One of the specific ones were those wild grasses, those kind of the ones that aren't as maintained as we would our own lawns. So they, with the drought, they got very dry. So a lot of it was the tall kind of natural grass, which is that trade-off. We want that natural beauty. We want that open space. We want that in our communities. But it also does carry some risk with it and some different types of either things that we might have to do to mitigate that risk, all the way from do nothing to make everything concrete. So a lot of it was the wild grasses. I was talking to some of the firefighters and some of the experts on that in the area, and they say we have a very similar risk here in Longmont with our open spaces that butt up to our communities, but also the greenway trails could be something that could also spread some of that in those high drought conditions. But there were some things in that situation. It went from that wildfire to that conflagration, that urban fire. They described it to me as a wildfire with houses as the fuel. So what happens is it starts that chain reaction that gets very hard to stop. So people's fences, people's decks, people's lawn furnitures, vents into the house. If the embers got into there, it could start the attics on fire. Windows blew out. Everything in your house is fuel. So there was a huge mixture of fuels involved with that, but most of it, where it did start with, was with a lot of those wild grasses. And they're still investigating the actual initial cause, but everything around you can be fuel. Did that answer the question? And I'm sorry, for those listening online, the question was, what were the fuels involved with the Marshall fire? Any other questions about alert and warning? All right, next slide. All right, so this is something we're going to do as a group a little bit later, but the things that we want to make sure people do with the disasters is that they can be such fast-moving events that it's best to plan beforehand. Think just a little bit of that thought before action of what would I do if. It doesn't have to be, and when we go through these worksheets, it doesn't have to be a full, this is my nuclear bomb attack, this is my fire plan. This is my zombie plan. There are some different ways that we can go about it, and so that's something that we're going to have a little bit of fun with this. But just think about what would happen if I was at work, if I was at home, if I was on vacation. And the other thing too is just take it out of your head, put it down on paper, is a really good mental step toward preparedness. So think about all these things and kind of have a little bit of that thought before action. Next slide. All right. Other thing that we've been telling people to do for probably about September 11th is where a lot of this really started getting pushed forward by FEMA, Department of Homeland Security, the whole build-a-kit idea. it's had, kind of reasonable success in some areas. It depends, again, it's so different person to person. Some people have the means to go out and just buy a pre-made kit. Some people, if you're paycheck to paycheck, it's really hard to make those extra pushes to buy something that you're not planning to use right away. But there are some workarounds with that we can talk about a little bit more. There's a million different sources out there for YouTube videos, for ready.gov, all different places that can talk about how to build a kit. My personal one, I used something that we had back in Iowa called 20 Weeks to Preparedness. That was that whole list of items, but it was buy 5 things every week for 20 weeks, and then you'll have a pretty reasonable kit. Again, the nice things about it is toilet paper was in there, so when everyone was, when the stores were running out of toilet paper, I had a little bit extra to get me there. I've got a little bit extra food that I've actually used in a small situation. I haven't used this in a full-on disaster yet, but if I can't make it to the grocery store this week, I've got a little extra food. If I'm sick and I shouldn't be going to the grocery store because I don't want to get other people sick, I've got some extra stuff that I can live off for a couple days. I've got first aid kits. Everyone should already have one of those in the car, in the home, in the workplace. But just kind of thinking about, what is my situation? Who lives with me? Who lives next door to me? Do I have a pet? Do I not have a pet? What are the things that I would need if, just say everything was closed that day? Say it was a bank holiday and everything's closed. If I needed to get my medications, what could I do? If I needed to get some important paperwork and the internet was down that day, what could I do? So we'll talk a lot more about that once we finish the slides. Next slide. All right, be resilient, know your neighbors. If I could get rid of every other slide in this presentation and keep one, it would be this one. The biggest thing that we see over and over again in disasters is those tighter-knit communities are the ones that fare the best in disasters. The people that know their neighbors, that know that their neighbors' strengths and weaknesses, that talk with each other, that have this community, like a church, like the people you go to the gym with, the people that you work with. Just knowing them and knowing that you can rely on each other. If my power's out, do I have a friend whose house I could go to? If my house is flooded, where can I go? If I live in low grounds, do I have friends in the high grounds, and vice versa? Have those contacts. A lot of times when we do have these big emergencies, we set up shelters, but a very small percent of the population actually goes to those. Most people will go to a family member's house, a friend's house, and just kind of ride things out. The nice thing about that is you're not in that unfamiliar situation with people that you don't know. They might, if they're friends of yours, they're probably into a lot of the same things that you are into. So you might not have as big of a disruption. They might like the same games, the same movies, the same things that you like. They might already know that you have a dog. They might like dogs too. So lot more benefits to that. But also, I've got a neighbor next door to me. He's 80 years old, retired. Can't shovel his driveway. So we've talked to each other. I've talked to the other neighbors. I shovel their driveway for them. It's not a lot of extra burden on me. And it's the same kind of thing. If I needed a dog sitter really quick, it'd be a lot easier for me to ask him. Know what kind of equipment they have, what you might have to deal with, and if you have some of that kind of stuff for yourself, let your neighbors know about it. Say, hey, I think they talked about, it used to be everyone got their paper, so if you saw the paper not get picked up, you would know it's like, okay, maybe something's wrong, I need to go check on them. But just have those regular check-in points. If you haven't seen them in a while, if their car hasn't moved for a while, just make sure that you're checking in. Next slide. And be educated. This is if you've never done anything before, if this is the first time you've ever thought about disasters, if the Marshall Fire really kicked it off and kind of gave you that idea that I really need to do something, this is a great place to start, but it should never end here. Actually kind of got into the presentation and forgot to give a little bit of my background, but I love education. I love taking classes. I love learning new things. And every one of those pieces kind of links together like a big spider web of just kind of, I know a little bit about this thing that I'm learning about just because I have some background from a different class. I actually got started in disasters at my church back in Illinois, Living Lord Lutheran actually. where we would go on mission trips every summer. We would go to, a lot of times we would go to New York, we would go to Minnesota. We actually went down to Hurricane Katrina and really started to learn a little bit about what happens in disasters, and that people have different needs, that there are people out there that didn't grow up in the same situation that I did, and just kind of a little bit of everything's different, and knowing how to learn about those and how to work with them. After high school, I joined the Navy. I spent 8 years as a hospital corpsman, which is in the medical field. So I was with a group of Marines, so learned a lot, not only about first aid, medicine, life safety, but also some good survival skills, kind of how to live and how to sleep on the ground for multiple days. That ended up being a really valuable skill, to where if I knew that I would be out of shelter, I know how to stay warm. I know kind of how to adapt, improvise, and overcome in those situations. After being in the Navy, I went to college for emergency management, spent 4 years learning about that and fire science and kind of the nature of disasters, learning a lot about weather. And actually these days, I don't stop there. With emergency management, there's a lot of chances to take really good classes. A lot of them are free through FEMA. A lot of them, any of you could sign up for yourselves. But took it one step further and decided I really have an interest in firefighting. So I've joined a volunteer fire department. I'm in Fire Academy right now and learning about hazmat, learning about the nature of fire, all sorts of different things. But it's really important to kind of keep that hunger for learning, because like I said, there's YouTube videos out there, there's online articles, there's books in the library, there's hundreds and thousands of sources out there to learn more about what you might need to know in a disaster. We also have the American Red Cross, First Aid, CPR. They also put on shelter training for if you would like to be involved in helping people set up a shelter. If you would like to get your church here registered as a shelter, kind of doing those evaluations to make sure you're ready to do those kind of things. Just some basic things like how to control the utilities in your house. It doesn't have to be a disaster. I've had pipes break before where I had to know where to find the water shut off to prevent that extra flooding and mitigate some extra damage. There's lots of volunteer opportunities out there for the things that you're interested, that can not only have that nexus to disasters, but can also be a great way to, again, build your community, build those people you can rely on. We have here for the city of Longmont, we have 3 main programs. 2 of them are actually working on merging into a single program. We have the Community Emergency Response Team, which is a program that's nationwide, got started back in the 80s with the earthquakes in California, the earthquakes in Mexico, realizing that there were a lot of situations where there's only so many responders to people in the community, and a lot of times you have to learn how to be the help before help arrives. So we do a 30-hour class that teaches a lot of basic things that you might need to do in your own community with your neighbors. We also have the Citizens Volunteer Patrol, which is an auxiliary of the police department here in Longmont, that is kind of helps out with some of those smaller day-to-day safety and security tasks in the city here. They do a lot of the auxiliary patrols. On Black Friday, they'll go out to a lot of the kind of the areas where there might be a lot more people gathering. There might be a little bit more, kind of a little bit of anger, wanting to get that big screen TV. And just when we have events and parades, help out to kind of monitor traffic, to make sure people are being safe, and also to be eyes and ears out in the community, that if somebody had an emergency, they would be able to get responders there quicker. We also have the victims advocates. So through, if you've ever been a victim of a crime, we have a lot of resources here in the city of Longmont, financial resources, security resources, ways to make sure that you are safe and can help be made whole, as well as just some of the mental health and just kind of things that you might need counseling to kind of, again, help make yourself and your family whole. But all of these are volunteer programs, so if they're the kind of things that interest you, great ways to become involved and, again, become some of those helpers. Next slide. All right, action plan. We're going to talk a little bit about more of this. This is the other handout I gave you, so we can skip this one right now. Next slide. 4 easy things that we can do right now. We already talked about, we gave you those little red cards. Make sure that you're signed up and make sure that you're set up to get any type of emergency. That redundancy is better to have, 1 is none, 2 is 1. That if one of those doesn't work or somehow your phone's not working on that frequency that day, that you have other ways of getting those disaster alerts. Like us on Facebook, another great way to, that's going away a little bit more. It's still there, but there are fewer people on Facebook. So we need to make sure that we're innovating with the city too and figuring out where people get their information to make sure that we're a part of that community. But you could just, talk to, if you know people that work for the city, in your utility bills, a lot of information comes out. But just kind of build some of those lines of communication. Talk to your family about your plan. This is why I really like doing presentations in these type of environments, because you're hearing the information at the same time. You're already with your family. You're already with your friends. You're already with your community. You don't need to sell them on this information too. And just start thinking about some of those items that you could have in your kit. Again, this one took a little while to make. It's not complete. It's in different pieces, and things in there are also going to expire or break down over time. But start thinking about how you can have a little bit extra stored. We're so used to on-demand everything with 2-day shipping, things like that, that if I run out of something, I just order more of it. But we're not so much on where we keep our pantries filled. We have some non-perishable food saved up for just if we get sick or we can't make it to the grocery store. Just a big part of that is every once in a while, pick some of those items where you know that if I couldn't make it to the store, this is something I wouldn't want to go too many days without. For me, it's that dog. I got to make sure I have dog food, and there's a lot of times that if I run out, it's not going to be my normal grocery day, and I don't want to have to run out to get just dog food. I don't want to waste the gas and the time on that. So what I've finally started doing was having his bin of dog food and the bag of dog food. So when the bin ran out, I put the bag in there, and that's when I went and bought another bag. I do the same thing with shampoo. I do the same thing with toothpaste, to where it's like I don't want to have to run to the store for that one item that ran out. So those things that I'm constantly using are part of my day-to-day life. I want to make sure I've got a little extra, especially food. I like to eat. All right, next slide. All right, that's all of the presentation. Any questions on some of that information? Was a lot of it kind of review? Was some of it brand new to some people? It should be hitting a little bit in the middle, but especially the part that we want to make sure we're not overemphasizing anymore is that disasters are bad. We all know that at this point. So, had a question?
Yeah, so having the go kit,
Mm-hmm.
great, having financial papers, your medication, all this and that.
Mm-hmm.
But that stuff, you don't want your financial papers in an obvious place for a bad guy to take.
Mm-hmm.
You want your medication where you consume it every day. So how do you make those two balance out?
Mm-hmm. So the question for anyone online or watching this later was, how do you balance out the items that you keep in your kit and where you keep them? That's one of the big limitations that we've had with the whole idea of just putting out the information on building kit, because I have this kit in my home. I don't have this big of a kit in my car. I don't have this big of a kit in my work. It's really making sure it's like, okay, it's like, if I need tools in this kit, I have tools in my garage. Do I buy 2 sets of tools? Do I make sure that I'm going to grab those ones? And that's where it gets really complicated, and that's where it starts to be very individual specific. For mine, I have that paperwork in there, but you had mentioned that that's something that you don't want to have obvious out in the open if a burglar or for that type of event. But you want to make sure that you still have that stuff. So really, I don't have the perfect answer, but that's where it kind of comes into the next exercise that we're going to be doing, is figuring out what you need to do for your own situation. I definitely do recommend having that paperwork, but the nice thing about the kits is mine's in this Rubbermaid container right here. I could put that in my garage next to all the other Rubbermaid containers. It's not a very obvious place that burglars might look for, especially when it's surrounded by a bunch of those black and yellow containers that look exactly the same, that one of them might have Christmas decorations, one of them, has my emergency kit. So you can try and be a little less, you don't have to put a big thing that says emergency kit on it. It really depends. Does that kind of answer the question? Or is that?
Yeah, it's complicated. I mean,
It is.
the medication was the most obvious.
Right. Right. And so that is one that I myself have a prescription that I take every day that it stays in the bathroom, and I haven't been able to get to the point yet to where it's a conversation you can have with your doctor or with your pharmacist. To the same way I have the bin of dog food and the bag of dog food, I have my medications for day to day, and then if you can somehow get an extra week or an extra month, you can have that in the bin, but you have to make sure that you're rotating it out just like you're rotating your food. So really I think the point to put across is it has to become kind of a habit and kind of blends in with your daily life. It's not just this one bin that's packed away for a rainy day. The same way with mine, the food in there. I like to hike, I like to camp, so I keep a lot of that type of food in there. And it's always the oldest stuff in my kit comes out, goes in my bag, and then it gets replaced with new stuff. So it's kind of just having, it's the same way if anyone at the beginning of COVID learned the term SDS or SNS, Strategic National Stockpile. That's very much where it has a lot with medications. The ones that are newly manufactured go and are held in that Strategic National Stockpile. Then they come out of that and then they get distributed. So it's kind of having that place where it's held and then it gets used. So kind of having that thought with a lot of things like medications and perishables, I think is one of the good ways to go about it. And another question in the back?
Yeah, I saw we're going to cover it.
Okay. All right. So, one more?
How long does bottled water last? Getting yours and stuff?
It depends. A lot of times they will put an expiration date on the actual water. It depends a little bit on the additives that they're putting in there, if it's just regular water versus if they put some type of nitrogen or chlorine in there to be a stabilizer. Usually what they're measuring, the same water that we have in these packets is the same water that's been on the earth for millions and millions of years. It's just how has it been processed, how long ago has it been processed. Usually what the expiration date is talking about is a little bit more of either the stabilizer that they might put in there to kind of keep it a little bit more fresh, to kind of keep just oxygen out or replace it with that, or the actual packaging itself. Plastics, while they do stay around for years, do degrade over time. So this actually expired in 2014. You can kind of test your equipment, see if it's gone bad or gone stale, but really water doesn't have as much of a shelf life. It's a good idea to rotate it out. I keep a lot of my water at home in a big 5-gallon bucket, or not bucket, one of those jug or jerry can kind of deals. And it's just the same as everything else. I don't want it to sit there and hit an expiration date. I want to make sure that it's getting used and then replaced, that it's always kind of flowing through. But the answer on that, they'll usually put a manufacturer date and an expiration date, and it looks like they recommend about 5 years for these. But no, I definitely wouldn't want to have 5-year-old water as my only drinking supply in an emergency. All right, any other questions? All right, good. So this is the next part I want to get into. Everyone should have that sheet with all the little X's on it. If you could pull that out right now. So go ahead, work with your neighbors. This is a group activity. Look through that list and look through all the different kind of disasters that are on the side right here. And then kind of look at the top. Put a little X if it's happened here, if it's happened to me, if I feel prepared for it. And then just kind of look through those and look at all the things on the top. Would those be disrupted by the type of disaster? Would shelter and property be affected by a water main break? So just kind of take a few minutes and look through that with your neighbors, talk with your neighbors. And even there's some blank spaces in there, thinking about different types of disruptions that could happen. I've moved across state lines multiple times, so that's actually a family and preparedness disaster that I kind of thought of when I first did this exercise, because there was a lot of disruptions to my, I had to change my utility companies. I had to pack everything up and figure out what I'm going to need immediately and what can go in the pod and I can wait for 2 weeks for. So just go ahead and talk with your neighbors and start just filling that out. Give you about 5-7 minutes. Hey, we just had one comment. As somebody pointed out, that pandemic isn't on here. So there are some blank spaces. If you see something that's not on here, you can go ahead and add it and just go down that list and figure out, what did it impact. Take about 3 more minutes. All right. How's everybody feeling? Do you need a little more time or? All right. So hopefully we identified, kind of just went down this list and agree with a lot of the places the check marks are. That to say that a tornado would impact my power at my house. I might have to evacuate my house. It would have some communications impacts. Did anyone have something that wasn't on this list that they wrote down? Nobody? Oh. That's yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know if everyone could hear that online or not, but just talking about another one, identity fraud. Something that wasn't listed here that had some major disruptions. If you freeze your card for a couple days, you have to get your credit score, you have to get brand new cards, and then if you have accounts that are, that your credit card's saved on, you have to change all of those. I had the same thing happen, and my water bill, I had one of those accounts associated with it, and so they were about to shut off my water. So that's a really good one. Lots of disruptions there. Anyone else? Yeah, no, a sudden death of a spouse or death in the family. I just lost an uncle a couple weeks ago, and there's so much that it's back in Illinois. I might have to travel for it, and there's figuring out the will. There's figuring out, going through all that stuff. So that's a really good one right there. I'm sorry.
She didn't want me to say that.
Yeah, no, but a lot of these too, with the disasters, we've all gotten some really good wake-up calls, I think, in the last couple years. But sometimes we don't want to think about these things. It's like, that's so bad, I just don't want to think about it. Or, I'll deal with that when it comes. But some of those small steps to be prepared beforehand, like that's why we do wills, is because we don't, it might help prevent the family fighting over things. It might help it might be able to kind of put those thoughts to paper, put that plan in place to say, this is what I want you to do if the worst happens.
That's why I think having it on the refrigerator, the medicines that you take when 911 calls
Mm-hmm.
in, and are they going to resuscitate you? All of that stuff, right?
Oh, yeah. And that's...
They tell you have it on the refrigerator.
Mm-hmm.
Is that where you put it now, or have they got a better spot?
That's still, so what we're talking about is having that list of medications, do not resuscitate or do resuscitate, kind of if you were unconscious and paramedics came to your house, what you would want them to know. Refrigerator is still a really good spot for that. We don't have any of them with us. We're waiting to get more in. It's called File of Life, which is just a little... you can usually get them at police stations, fire stations, at the Safety and Justice Center. I think we do still have some. Your doctor's office may have them as well. But it's a little sleeve that you can put your medications. It's got the checklist of all the things, that even things that you might not have thought about. But it's the exact same thing as having a plan for that that disruption that you might not be awake to deal with. So, yeah.
On that same thing, my mom had that kind of an emergency and actually passed away. She had the do not resuscitate and everything, but she had not signed it.
Oh, no. Yeah. And
make sure that you're up to date on.
No, I said that was one of the areas that, in more ways than one, I lucked out on. When I was in the Navy, I deployed to Iraq, and they had everyone go through legal beforehand to make sure that wills were in place, that powers of attorney were in place, all those different types of things. I actually, unfortunately, because switching around units, I never did that. And so it would have been a really rough time in more ways than one for my family because of that. Luckily, I was 18 at the time and didn't have a lot of financials to put in order. It was a lot more simple, but it still would have been a major disruption for my family. Go ahead.
At one point, I was on a knee scooter.
Mm-hmm.
And my phone died one night at 4 o'clock at night. I live alone.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know my neighbors. And I didn't want to go out at 4 o'clock at night to buy a new phone, so I was basically totally alone.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get, I mean, if I had to get very far, I couldn't have gotten very far. So I think knowing your neighbors is very important. Now I know my neighbors better, but if you're in this, I mean, it's funny how suddenly not having a phone can almost seem like an emergency.
Yeah, no, that's everything nowadays. Mentioning losing your phone or losing, if the phone breaks, if it runs out of power, that's all your phone numbers. That's, I have my driver's license on my phone now. That's the way I communicate with everybody. So losing that phone is a huge disruption. And luckily there's some ways to back up your data that they didn't use. I'd lost one of my phones in the mud when I was about 19 years old, and I still haven't gotten back some of those phone numbers. But yeah, huge disruption. Any other ones? So as we went through that list, we noticed that for a lot of these disasters, a lot of these things that can happen, and even things that weren't on this list that kind of jogged our memories, they have a lot of similar disruptions to them. So what I want everyone to kind of do, notice that we didn't have nuclear bomb detonations, or we didn't have the end of the world. We didn't have the apocalypse on this one. We didn't have the zombie apocalypse, because some of those events are just so big that what we've started to find, it was kind of fun to use zombies as a paradigm to think about disaster preparedness, but we're starting to find out that a lot of those, if we prepare for the biggest ones, we'll be ready for the smaller ones. That was the idea for a long time, but a lot of people, this is actually a question, I'm on the online dating right now. This is one of the questions for the prompts to write about yourself, is what's my zombie apocalypse plan? And I guarantee you, way more than 50% of people just said, I'm just going to die. I'm just going to become a zombie and live my best zombie life. So there are so many of those really big ones where it's like, I'm going to do whatever I can, but I don't know if I could survive the zombie apocalypse. That's too much of a question mark. So they just stopped there. So what we've started to change the paradigm on is stop trying to plan for the biggest ones so you'll be ready for the smaller ones. But turn that sheet kind of on its side right here so those disruptions are what's face up. And start kind of thinking about shifting that paradigm a little bit more of, instead of trying to make sure how I want to prepare for a tornado, how I want to prepare for a flood, how I want to prepare for a death in the family, start thinking a little bit more about how I can prepare for those disruptions that come along with so many different disasters. When I first saw this, it was a real eye-opening moment for me too, especially because I'd spent years and years in emergency management teaching that same thing, be prepared for tornadoes, fires, floods, all these different things, build a kit. But when that got shown to me, it's actually the exact same thing that emergency management as a government kind of entity started doing a long time ago, is we stopped saying, okay, what's the city's fire plan? What's the city's flood plan? What's the city's tornado plan? And realized that we switched it over to what we call emergency support functions, or ESFs, so that instead of having that tornado plan, we have our communications plan, we have our utilities and infrastructure plan, we have our medical and public health plan. Because a lot of those things impact all the same disasters in different ways. Some of them are big, some of them are small. With the pandemic, it was very public health heavy. With the Marshall fires, when we got together in that emergency operations center, it was very public information heavy. They had a lot of information, a lot of questions that they had to get out. So we had to make sure that we beefed up those public information officers and those external affairs people that knew how to send out messages. Another big part of that was, again, it was the damage assessment. That's going to be, you're going to need a damage assessment for floods, fires, zombie apocalypses probably, alien, all those things. You're going to need those to manage those simple disruptions. So kind of take a look, talk to your neighbors a little bit, put that sheet on its side and talk a little bit more, less about the disasters, more about the disruptions. How do you feel about managing those disruptions? Have you ever had to manage that disruption before? We mentioned identity theft, car breaking down, death in the family. These are a lot of things that we've already done and we already might feel a little bit more comfortable doing. So kind of take about 3 minutes and look over that real quick. Talk with your neighbors. All right. So how'd that go? Did that change the conversation a little bit? All right. But really big, like I said, it's the same push that we made within the FEMA, the state, the county, the city planning and preparedness to really, again, get away from being disaster specific to being disruption specific. I mentioned with COVID, when people were asking us, what's the city's plan? What are you guys going to do? Are my lights going to stay on? Is my water going to keep running? We had to do kind of that same thing just at the city level, but also at the personal level with our staff. We want to make sure that they're prepared so that they can manage these disruptions, so that they can make it into work, keep doing their job to help prevent disruptions in the community and kind of keep that from snowballing. That was the thing that kind of, when we were starting to talk about that in the early days of the Emergency Operations Center during COVID, thinking about how could this spin out of control and what that would take, what we came down to a lot of times was pretty much everyone would have to stop showing up to work. Everyone would have to just say, I quit, I give up. That's really what kind of would push that catastrophic society collapse kind of thing, which we find out time after time that that's not really what happens. People still help their neighbors. People still, especially especially at the local level where we're working for our friends and neighbors. I'm a resident of Longmont too. I definitely don't want to see bad things happen to Longmont because I live here. I talked with my coworkers, like we were saying, what if they stop paying us? It's like, yeah, I'd probably still show up. This is an important job. I'm still going to do it. So it is a lot of that community base. It is a lot of that, pride in what you do and desire to kind of make that difference. So that's one of the things that kind of gave us a lot more of a better thought about what was going to happen. And we've been making it through 2+ years of this, and we're still going. People are still, you hear a lot about great resignation and people changing jobs and moving and things like that. But for the most part, the basic things that we need are still, those basic communities are still maintained. We had another question during the break talking about that important paperwork, those important backups of those things that you might need if you had to evacuate, if you had those disruptions. That was actually one of the disruptions that they mentioned. I had a question about fire safes. During the Marshall Fire, a lot of people that had to evacuate, didn't have time to grab that safe and take it with them, or might have been at work at the time. Did those hold up? I actually have to go and find out some more. I haven't heard a lot of stories about that. I have heard they were saying some of the stories online that long of a fire, the safes are only rated for a certain amount of time, and that's usually the time it would take if only your house was on fire for the fire department to be able to come in, extinguish the flame, and do what they call overhaul, which is just making sure all the fires are out and that they can move valuables out of the damaged area and try and salvage some of that stuff that's in the house. So when you buy a safe, that is something that's listed on the safe, how many hours it's rated for. And unfortunately, with a lot of the Marshall Fire things, that those safes were pushed way beyond what they were rated for in terms of hours, just because when the house is a total loss and will continue burning because there's so many other houses. So those are built more for those individual disruptions where if it was just your house. So we talked about what are some of the workarounds. If that safe fails, what are my other options? We talked about safe deposit boxes, maybe keep it, and we talked about a lot of banks don't do that anymore. So what's another workaround? Maybe keep, if you have that friend that lives in a different city, lives in a different state, maybe have them hold on to some of your important documents for you. With online now, you can take pictures of the documents, you can scan them, you can upload them, make sure you're putting them somewhere safe and secure, because now we have cybercrime and incidents that is another disruption or causes another boatload of disruptions. But there are options. So that's the thing that we want you to do to take home, talk about over lunch. As we have for each one of those disruptions, we have them all listed out here and kind of have where you can start taking some plans to, if I lost power and computer, if I lost water, sewer, and sanitation, shelter and property, safety and security, food and cooking, all the different things that are on that disruptions list are all in here. And so take a chance to talk with your neighbors. I think we've got about 3 more minutes here if lunch is here already, but this could be a great conversation over lunch. Good?
Quick question.
Sure.
I mean, this is all individual, but watching what happens on the whole West Coast, with all those fires, and instantly, it doesn't matter about all the plans you had for your house is gone. Where do you go?
Yeah.
You just
So-
stand there, and then they don't even let you get to your house. You know, just things you don't even think of. Is there like a one thing you're supposed to do that all towns do? I mean, think of the accountability. It's been overwhelming watching California and everything, and then right over here, a couple of fires. I don't know. I'll be quiet, but I guess you could. Just what do? Stand there?
We a phrase we used to have in the military a lot that I kind of argue with in some forts, but it was saying the worst thing you can do is nothing. The second worst thing that you can do is the wrong. The best thing you can do is the right thing. The second worst thing you can do is the wrong thing, but do something. That's why we talk about situational awareness. Get those alerts, know what's going on, but have that thought before action so that if there was the one thing, it's just to think about it, talk with other people about it, to say, what would I do? Where would I go? How would I not just stand there? And a lot of times, you know, we talk, if you've learned about psychology, it's that fight, flight, or freeze. That's kind of ingrained into our brains about what we're going to do. And a lot of the times, we don't have as much control over what happens, but there are things that we can do to give ourselves better odds. Another phrase is luck favors the well-prepared. So if you have thought about a lot of these things, sometimes it might not 100% match up with the situation that you're in, but some components of it might. And having a little bit more of that thought before action. If you read a lot of stories about people in POW camps, the people that made it versus the people that didn't, there's a lot of that will to survive, that will to keep going, that this too shall pass. And so there's not a one pill for everything, but having a lot of these things put together puts you in a much better situation. Having those neighbors, having that community, having ideas of places you can go, people you can talk to. In the fire service too, when we do our tests, we almost never do them as an individual. It's always as a team. So if I don't know the exact answer for this situation, the person to my left or right might know the answer, and it gives us a much better chance. So I would say it's really about the community and those around you. All right. You had your hand up first. Sorry.
Just real quick, in terms of evacuation, like I remember Hurricane Sandy, seeing the pictures of cars just on the interstate standing still. Am I better off being one of those cars standing still and hoping to go forward? Or, you know, I mean, if you know the back roads, maybe that's a thing, but how do you plan for that?
So it's very incident specific. So in hurricane zones, there's a lot. If you lived in one of those, there are plans out there of how you would evacuate people, getting the people that need the most time or are closest to the hazard, getting them out first and kind of working in steps to make sure that you can limit that traffic impact. So that would be very specific. If you live in the mountains, they also have evacuation plans of how you would get out. For like the Marshall Fire, the lucky thing is that there are so many different directions that you can go. It's the same thing with any building that you're in. There's a lot of different exits. So when you're in the building, kind of think about if there was a fire that happened, would I go to the main door, or would that be worse because that's where everyone else is going to be going? Do I maybe need to kind of look at some different exits and think of some different options? So the same thing applies to emergencies. If everyone's going for the same road, there is a potential to be back up. If you know a different way around it, that might be a better option for you. That might keep you out of that traffic. We don't see it a lot, but I actually did one of my papers in college on evacuations, and on if anyone's ever seen the main poster for The Walking Dead where he's just riding his horse down that line of cars. That was my question, is what makes it so that line of cars just stays there through the apocalypse? And it would have to be the type of disaster that can quickly overcome the actual evacuation itself. So that's where a lot of evacuations, that's where they say don't get on the road, shelter in place. If you've already got a safe place to be, there's no reason to leave it. But make sure that you're monitoring what they're saying to do. if they say shelter in place, know what that is versus evacuation, and that you're evacuating at the right time. Like I said, my friend, he didn't feel safe in his situation, so he decided to leave. That can be a problem sometimes if too many people decide to do that. It causes what's called a shadow evacuation, where people that don't need to get out are getting on the roads and congesting the roads. That wasn't really the case here because, again, there were so many different ways to get out of Superior and Louisville. But it's all situational awareness and kind of getting the message and deciding what you're going to do based on the message. But the question there was just about evacuation orders. How do you prevent, is that correct? How do you prevent getting stuck in traffic? Are there different, take different routes? And the answer is yes. You can think about some of those different situations. If you know the area well, you might know a better way. But, yeah. Oh, you had your hand up first, I'm sorry.
Okay. So part of it is the preparedness and being ready for it. We went through a tornado that destroyed 1,000 homes. So all those people that had adequate insurance came out very well. So that's part of your building your kit, is to make sure that you're insured for the loss, that your structure can be replaced. But for my sister, an insurance company gave her money to live on the next day, rented a car, had already booked up blocks of rooms so that everybody who was affected could sleep at night. And so she was put back together and whole. They found an apartment for her, rented it, supplied it with kitchenware, everything that they needed in a matter of days. So that's a big part for each of us to make sure that we have that insurance that can provide for us in a disaster too.
No, that's a really good point, and something that I didn't hit on, that's a whole nother class in itself. And a lot of times insurance companies put those on for you. They don't, they want to prevent paying out. So a lot of times insurance companies will do everything they can to make sure that they, that you're prepared so that you have less of a chance for a claim. So they're happy to do that kind of stuff. So definitely make sure you understand how your insurance works. What is covered, what's not covered. A lot of times flood insurance is one of the big ones that's not under your normal policy. It's the exact same thing we're seeing with the Marshall Fire. It's a very high income area, so a lot of people are very well insured, but on the disasters that I've been on as a volunteer through Team Rubicon, through my church, things like that, a lot of the times what we're dealing with are the people that did not have that adequate insurance. If you have adequate insurance, they send a team out, they send Serve Pro out to clean out your house, remove all the drywall, put new drywall back up. If you don't have that, you might have to rely on volunteers or somebody else, but that is a really good point that as you're going through this, as you're kind of saying, what would be my options for long-term outages if my house was lost completely? And insurance is probably the where you might land with that, and that might make you think, do I have enough? Do I want more? What if? And ask some of those questions. So that's really the point of this next sheet right here, is to think through those disruptions, short-term, long-term, and what would I do? And that's really where that plan comes from. Instead of taking the cookie-cutter plan off the shelf and filling in all the boxes and feeling okay about it, this is really talking about your own personal situation, your own family situation, and what would I do for those? And that's where you can kind of build your plan, build your kit to suit this plan. Don't build a kit, don't 100% just go off of this was the list that was on the ready.gov. Figure out what you need for yourself. So this would be a great thing to do over lunch, do when you get home, do with your family, or do by yourself. But it kind of will lead you to those. These are the disruptions. This is what could happen. This is what I think I need to do. Or if you get to those points that I don't know, you start getting question marks, that's where you can start going to Google, start figuring out, I need to find a class about my insurance. I need to learn more about fire safes. But yeah, just never stop learning with it as another thing I would definitely recommend. Any other questions before we end? I think lunch is and has been here. One more?
Two specific things.
Mm-hmm.
My wife has oxygen, so we have to have oxygen tanks, which is a fire hazard.
Mm-hmm.
So that we tend to have a bunch of tanks just in case we run out or something. Should we not do that as much because of fire?
I would say safe storage, quick answer. You already have paint in your house, you have hazardous materials. It's all about where you keep them and make sure that if they were impinged by fire, that it's not going to create. But no, I wouldn't keep them out of your house. It's the cost benefit. It's kind of a little bit morbid. Well, which one would kill you quicker? Is a good way that we always like to talk about when we get those kind of questions in the CERT class in the medical world, is which one's the quicker killer? And did you still have a question? I'm sorry. Mm. Mm.
Basically, every emergency has to have a totally different plan.
Yeah.
I mean, some of it is the same, but some of it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
I was listening to the radio, and people were calling from down there and saying, I tried to get up. I always go to Denver. Well, it was absolutely the wrong way to go because the fire was coming from the northwest.
Mm.
They were taking the same route as the fire did. They didn't have any other plan because in their mind,
Mm-hmm.
that was the safe place to go.
Yeah. No, definitely think about it. Again, if the hazard's coming from the east, I'm going this way. If it's coming from the west, so know your roots, and yeah, definitely know your roots, know your maps, know your community. I'm still learning. Driving here, I saw a building that big business over a little north of here. I've never seen that before. So keep learning your community. Take walks, take drives.
So before we say thank you to Kevin, he is going downstairs, by the way, to join us for
Mhm.
lunch. So if you don't know, lunch is free. It's downstairs, and Diana and Greg and whomever else have been helping to cook. So I appreciate that. Head down that way and continue the conversation.